Hello. Part of the problem with dealing with an unscripted video like this is you tend to forget things, and in between the finish of part one and coming to part two here, I realized I forgot an important topic, and that's population control. Uh, that idea started early in the 19th century with a guy named Malthus, and he started predicting all sorts of bad things would occur due to excess population, or having more population than the food supply could support. The modern incarnation of that was by a professor, Paul Ehrlich, um, and he wrote something in just before the 1970s called the population bomb. And he also predicted massive starvation. And really, I think most of his predictions were off the mark. I think he would probably disagree and say, well, I got some things right. But in the main, I don't think it works. In stepped another person, Julian Simon, and he made a bet with Paul Ehrlich on materials. Paul Ehrlich was predicting that materials would become scarce. Julian Simon thought, no, that's not true. So he made a bet, and what turned out, what happened was that Simon was proven to be correct. The prices of resources that he allowed Ehrlich to pick, all the prices went down, adjusted for inflation. And the key to this, I think, is a misunderstanding of what we actually have for the world's resources. Julian Simon actually said a pretty Catholic thing, even though he wasn't a Catholic himself. He said that the greatest resource in the world are human people, are human persons, and that's really kind of the key to this sort of thing. Is that the population control people, the people who believe that we've got excess population, are actually diminishing the ingenuity of all these human minds at work. I mean, the real resources is what we can think of, what we can achieve. And whenever we come to these seemingly insurmountable problems, there always seems to be a solution that pops up. And you know, I don't want to say that we'll always come up with a solution, but it just seems to be a fair bet. And I don't believe that humankind can come up with its own salvation. But when it comes to these problems, when a problem gets severe enough, human ingenuity seems to kick in, and it is, I think, a real understanding to understand that the human mind is a great resource, and we're now dealing with several problems, really, actually due to underpopulation. Japan is a country that is severely aging, and Europe is in the similar situation, except that they're actually going to demographically be beat by the Muslim immigrant populations. Europe of Western civilization, perhaps within 50 years, will be no more. And I guess that's probably enough to speak about overpopulation, except to maybe note that this is the population control crowd is one of the forces that is trying to make birth control seem like a positive good, and I think that they're wrong on this. and then we'll continue on to the Pope's comments here. Late last year, a German named Peter Seewald interviewed Pope Benedict XVI, and that interview was published as The Light of the World, or Light of the World. And there was, it's almost comical that the press and the media focused on some comments that were made by the Pope in that interview, and they had to do with AIDS and the use of condoms. And as I mentioned earlier, there's quite a bit of hatred toward the Catholic Church because it refuses to bend. It refuses to see that condoms are the solution for the AIDS problem in Africa. And so they took, and the media took those words, and they kind of saw what they wanted to see, so to speak. They really didn't understand what the Pope was saying. And here's a list that comes from Jimmy Akin's, some typical comments from the or headlines from the media. Pope says condoms sometimes permissible to stop AIDS. Pope, condoms can be justified in some cases. Pope says condoms can be used in the fight against AIDS. Okay, one of the things to remember when dealing with this sort of thing is that these comments by the Pope were not magisterial statements. And what I mean by that is that they really don't have the teaching authority behind it. It's more of a personal interview, personal opinions by the Pope. And the media saw that there was some sort of shift in Catholic teaching about this, and this is not actually true. This is not the venue that the Pope would take if there was going to be any shift in teaching with respect to condoms. And the other point is that they didn't even get the message right. And let's take a look at what the Pope actually wrote. The Pope said, "There may be a basis in the case of some individuals, as perhaps when a male prostitute uses a condom, where this can be a first step in the direction of a moralization, a first assumption of responsibility on the way toward recovering an awareness that not everything is allowed, and that one cannot do whatever one wants. But it is not really the way to deal with the evil of HIV infection. That can really lie only in a humanization of sexuality." Now, there may be a little bit of a dispute on whether this was correctly translated, whether the Pope specifically meant a male prostitute, or whether he meant generally any prostitute. But that's kind of a minutia that's not really important here. The key to look at here is that he's saying that this is a first step in the direction of a moralization. Okay, he's saying this is a step in the right direction. But look at the end here. But it is not really the way to deal with the evil of HIV infection. Well, here he's clearly saying that, oh, wait a second, this is not the place where we stop. He's talking about a process, a journey, a recovering an awareness that not everything is allowed. Now, I really don't understand how they can look and say, oh, the Pope says it's okay to use condoms, when he's not really saying that. It's not really an accurate reading of the paragraph. It's a very selective reading. Then the question is immediately asked in response to the previous quote, are you saying then that the Catholic Church is actually not opposed in principle to the use of condoms? Here's the Pope's answer. She, of course, does not regard it as a real or moral solution, but in this or that case there can be nonetheless, in the intention of reducing the risk of infection, a first step in a movement toward a different way, or a more human way of living sexuality. Now, the media, I guess, decided that they were going to ignore that first qualifying statement. The Church does not regard it as a real or moral solution. They go on to the other part that says it can be a step in intention in reducing the risk of infection, a first step in a movement toward a different way. Now, this movement, this first step, is not the final step, and as I mentioned in the previous quote, in showing you in the previous quote, this is not a real or moral solution. It is possibly a small little moral awakening here that maybe what they're doing is not right in engaging in sex in the first place. And I'll even go even further. There was a section of area that was not included. It's useful to remember that the reason why the Pope brought up this in the first place, or the reason why this was brought up, it was in response to a question about AIDS in Africa. Peter Seewald was asking a question of the Pope, about the media criticism of the Church's policy about condoms and AIDS in Africa. Now, just before the blow-up quote about the prostitute using a condom, just before that, the paragraph just before that is this quote. And it's important to read this, because it really captures the effect of what the Pope is trying to say here. And I'm quoting the Pope now. But this just goes to show that condoms alone do not resolve the question itself. More needs to happen. Meanwhile, the secular realm itself has developed the so-called ABC theory. Abstinence, be faithful, condom, where the condom is understood only as a last resort when the other 2 points fail to work. This means that the sheer fixation on the condom implies a banalization of sexuality, which, after all, is precisely the dangerous source of attitude of no longer seeing sexuality as the expression of love, but only as a sort of drug that people administer to themselves. This is why the fight against the banalization of sexuality is also a part of the struggle to ensure that sexuality is treated as a positive value, and to enable it to have a positive effect on the whole of man's being. Now, I'd like to summarize the Pope's comments, because I'm sure that even still, after I've gone through the various paragraphs that are important to this, I think people will still miss the point here. Let me summarize in one pithy little statement here what the Pope is trying to say. The Pope is trying to say to the world and the media, stop fixating on condoms as a solution. Now, I'm sure that probably hasn't penetrated yet. People are probably saying, boy, that's pretty stupid. I'd like you to think a little bit about what's being proposed here. One thing that I often note when people are presenting moral extremes here, as in the exception that the world wants to invoke here in the case of AIDS, the assumption is always that condoms are 100% effective, and that's not true. It is absolutely not true that condoms are 100% effective. Now, I want you to remember this point right here. Condoms are not 100% effective. I've said it 3 times. It's true. Now, think about this. Think about this. You're married to a spouse. Obviously, but you're married to somebody. Let's say it's a guy who has AIDS. He's married to his wife who does not have AIDS. And now we're proposing as an act of love that this person, this married husband, this spouse who has AIDS, he's going to expose his wife to AIDS, to a risk of AIDS. Is that a completely loving statement? Honey, I love you so much that I want to expose you to a certain risk of AIDS. I want to propose to you that a person who truly loves his wife or who loves his spouse would not be willing to say, honey, I want sex so much that I want to expose you to death. Now I want to take you back to the beginning of my little video here, part 1, where I bring up the movie Watchmen, and I bring up the character Rorschach, and I said that it's the world that's pointed to death, rather than what the church is teaching. And think about this. Think about this. When the Pope is saying condoms are not the solution, the world's saying, oh, that's a solution of death. But think about it. Think about it. When a person, a spouse with AIDS, is going to say, honey, I want to have sex with you so much, I want to expose you to the risk of HIV and death. That, I propose, is a reflection. That's actually what the world is proposing. The world is the culture of death, and the church is proposing the culture of life. Now, I'm going to finish off with a small, short little clip from the Watchmen trailer, and then I'm going to continue with the Catholic version of life.
God help us all.